Hi everyone, my name's Kelly and I'm the head dietitian at BWS. I lead the other dietitians on my team for the nutrition side of our coaching programs, as well as I have a few of my own clients. Today I'm going to walk you through the step-by-step process that I personally take to meal prepping my meals for the week in 30 minutes or less. Trust me, I can understand what it can be like trying to manage your nutrition and also trying to manage your workouts. It can become a very overwhelming process very quickly, which is why I'm here to make it as easy and approachable as possible for you. One of the very first things you want to do is to look at your weekly schedule and plan when you are able to meal prep. I found that for myself and with the clients that I work with, having a plan ahead of time is one of the best ways to ensure that you do stick and accomplish the task at hand. So, take a look at your weekly calendar to schedule two things. One, the day that you will shop for the grocery ingredients that you need, and two, the day that you will actually meal prep. For example, for myself, I usually like to hit the grocery store on the way home from the gym on Fridays. It's convenient for me because it's already on my way home and I don't have to go out of my way to get there. However, I don't usually meal prep on that same day because I usually don't have time until Sundays. Then, when I get to Sundays, I've noticed that if I wait to meal prep until the afternoon, then I usually have to force myself to do it, and it can sometimes be a hit or miss depending on what I have going on and my motivation at the time. So instead, what I've done has been to meal prep in the mornings shortly after I've woken up and actually while I'm sipping my coffee. So figure out these times that work best for you. They can be on the same day if that works out best for your schedule. But make sure to actually schedule them in your calendar like they are meetings so that you can adhere to them. The next two things also have to do with you planning ahead. Like I had mentioned, planning ahead is one of the best things you can do for yourself to ensure that you stay on task, and it tends to make the whole process less overwhelming and less stressful for you. The first thing you'll want to plan ahead for is deciding which meals you want to meal prep. If you're just starting out with meal prepping, I would recommend that you only pick one meal until you get used to shopping for the ingredients, cooking, and storing the meal. For this one meal, pick the meal that will have the largest impact on your day. For example, if you notice that you're usually tired after a work day, and instead of making your dinner, you order takeout, then dinner is the meal that you should prepare ahead of time. I'm going to use myself as an example for this tutorial and what I typically do. So, since I've been meal prepping for years, I'm very comfortable with preparing two meals at once, which is lunch and dinner for me. If I take a look at my schedule, I always have time to make breakfast in the morning. And since my breakfast is always oatmeal that takes 5 minutes to prepare, I'm not going to prep that ahead of time. However, lunch and dinner are usually at the middle and the end of my day, both times where I tend to be very busy and don't have time to dedicate to making a full meal. Thus, I've decided that I'm going to prepare these two meals. After you've decided this step, the next thing you want to decide is what meals you're going to prepare. The thing I do want to stress here is that to be considered a meal, there really are no rules with this, meaning the meal doesn't need to be complex or even fully put together to be considered a meal. We'll walk through this in just a second, but for myself, I tend to batch cook my lunches as separate food sources and put it all together when I'm ready to eat, while for dinner, I tend to make more of a mixed meal. I'll walk through these individual examples so you can see the thought process behind it, but I want to initially provide you with some quick, long-lasting items that you can incorporate into your meal prep. For protein sources, any source that you can easily bake or cook in batches will be helpful to have on hand. Food sources like chicken breasts, chicken thighs, fish, ground turkey, or ground beef can be super easy to prepare. Even having canned options on hand like canned tuna, chicken, or salmon can make putting something together like a sandwich or wrap so easy and quick. For carbohydrate sources, the ones that are generally a bit easier to batch prep and last longer are pasta, rice, potatoes, couscous, quinoa, and oats. Overall, I want to help you all think outside the box a bit when it comes to this, and I think you'll understand what I mean when I walk through examples of what I typically do week to week. So let's get started with that right now. For lunch, I actually only ever prepare a protein source. Why? Because the protein source is so versatile and can be combined into an easy, quick lunch depending on what I'm in the mood for the day. One of my go-tos is chicken breast, but I vary up the flavor with different seasonings depending on what I want that week. Depending on what I want to eat that day, I can make that protein source into a salad, a sandwich, a wrap, or even have some carbohydrates and vegetables on the side prepared already to put together a meal. For dinner, I usually like more of a mixed dish, so there are a couple of things that you could do here. You could look at one of the recipes we've provided you with and pick out something for the week, or if you prefer to put something together yourself, you can do something similar to what I do. When I think about building a meal, I think about having a protein, carbohydrate, and vegetable source. Depending on what sounds good that week, I'll pick something from each category and then further decide if I need to add a fat source because my protein source that I chose was a lean protein option. So this week, a pesto shrimp pasta sounds really good to me. I usually add some vegetables to this dish like zucchini, bell peppers, and mushrooms just to make it a bit more balanced, so my vegetables are covered for this meal. My protein source is shrimp, which is a really lean protein option, so having the pesto as the sauce helps to balance out the fat for the meal. And lastly, for my favorite food source ever, pasta covers my carbohydrate needs. Now that we have our meals covered for the week, I'm going to head to the grocery store and pick out these items and then take you through the next steps for how to prepare both of these meals in 30 minutes or less. Now that we know what we're going to prepare for the week, let's take a look at those items to see what we can prepare at the same time. Don't worry if this isn't intuitive at first, as you'll learn to better multitask as you become more proficient with meal prepping. If we look at what I decided to prepare this week, the first thing I would start out with is preheating the oven to get ready to cook my protein source and also get some water boiling on the stove for the pasta, since I know both of these processes don't require much hands-on involvement from me. While those items are getting ready, the next thing I would do is start preparing my protein sources. For the chicken, to save even more time, you may have the option at your grocery store to buy pre-cooked or even canned options, but I just ended up buying chicken breast. I typically measure this after it's been cooked since I assemble the meal as it's cooked, so all I have to do is cut it up into smaller pieces so that it's able to cook quicker in the oven. Once I have that cut up, I'll add it to my sheet pan and season it. By the time this is done, the oven should be ready for it to go into. While I have the chicken cooking, I can get started on chopping the veggies I've chosen to include in this dish. You can buy vegetables pre-chopped to make this process even faster, but these do tend to be slightly more expensive. While I have this finishing up, I'll start another pan on the stove so the pan can get warm and I can add the shrimp to it to start cooking. Shrimp doesn't take that long to cook, and to save even more time, I've bought shrimp that's already peeled. You could also buy the shrimp cooked if you'd like to save even more time, but I found that I prefer to cook my own. As I start adding vegetables to the shrimp to cook down, my pasta water should be boiling and ready for me to add the dry pasta, so that's what I'll do next while everything else is cooking. Then, once it's finished cooking, it should be ready to add right to the vegetable and shrimp mixture. I'll first add the pesto, then the pasta, and a touch of the pasta water if I need to in order to make it easier for the pasta to bind to the sauce. After this, the chicken should also be ready to take out of the oven. As you can tell, throughout this whole process, I'm always trying to get one thing to cook on its own so that I can move my attention on something else that needs a bit more hands-on attention. Like I mentioned, this process may not be intuitive for you right away, and that's okay. As you become more familiar and more experienced with meal prepping, you'll pick up on these tips and tricks to make the process even easier and faster. Now that we've prepared everything for the week, it's time to store the food. Like I had mentioned, since I weigh my protein source as I'm ready to eat it for lunch, I'm just going to add that to a couple of containers. One of the containers I will add to the fridge to last me a few days, and the other I'll add to the freezer to store and then take it out of the freezer the day before I run out of chicken. In order to keep things as fresh as possible, I store ready-to-eat food in the fridge for 3 to 4 days, and then the other food that I have prepared, I freeze until I'm ready to eat the next batch. If you do have time in your week to meal prep on 2 separate days, then you can skip this step. But this is something that I found that works for me personally. It also depends on the type of food that you want to store. Protein sources tend to freeze very easily and taste very similar after it thaws out. For some carbohydrate and vegetable sources, there is a slight change in taste and texture for some of the options. Personally, I've noticed that potatoes and pasta freeze and thaw pretty well, but I have noticed a change in texture for rice. It's all about personal preference and what works best for you, so experiment a little bit. For storing the pasta dish, you can be meticulous about it in terms of weighing out the final cooked portion of the dish and then dividing it by the number of servings you need to prepare to hit your macros. However, since I plan on eating this for the whole week, I just eyeball and try to make the portions as even as possible in the amount of containers I need for the week. Remember, if you think about your calories in terms of the whole week versus just a single day, it makes everything a bit easier and more flexible. And that's how you meal prep for your week in 30 minutes or less. I hope you found these tips and tricks to be beneficial. And just remember, don't expect this process to be perfect immediately. It may take some time to get used to and adjust to, but you'll learn quickly enough and be able to incorporate this into your weekly routine.